located at the Z184 Vivekananda Global University in the Pink City, Jaipur. I'm Tripti Thapa, serving as the 68th year Zonal President, Zone 3, which is Maharashtra. The National Association of Students of Architecture, NASA India, is the world's largest student architecture organization established in 1957, along with over 350 associated colleges and 66,000 students across India and around the world. NASA India's primary objective is to create a platform for architecture students to learn and interact, engaging them directly and indirectly through online and offline programs. Research forms the foundation of academic growth, especially in architecture, where every idea is shaped in inquiry, exploration, and reflection. It is what bridges theory and practices, guiding students through seminars, research, and thesis, shaping them into critical thinkers and innovative designers. Around 5 years ago, in the 62nd year of NASA India, a visionary step was taken within the establishment of NASA India Research Cell, paving the way for a culture of curiosity and academic depth among the architecture students. Today, as we inaugurate the first edition of NASA India Research Conference, we continue that legacy, bringing together young minds to experience the rigor, discipline, and beauty of architectural research. We are truly honored to have architect Vijay Ramchandran, director of 100 Hands, as the moderator, and architect Kiran Kumar sir as the co-moderator for the landmark edition, guiding the students through this rigorous, inspiring journey of architectural thought. The jurors for today's panel discussion, Dr. Gauri Bharat, prominent author and historian specializing in indigenous architecture and material history in South Asia. Dr. Anita Susilan, professor and head of School of Architecture, Christ University. She is recognized as she is recognized for pioneering the Rural Studio program and specializes in ecological organization and socially sensitive design. Dr. Leon Marinas, Associate Professor at the School of Planning of Architecture, SPA Delhi. His research applies science and technology studies to understand the relationship between technology, design, and urban planning. We welcome you all for the panel discussion. We also have our, we also would like to call all of the dignitaries along with the National Council, National President Likhit Jain, National Advisor Avantika Pereira, National Vice President Javin Garg, along with the National Treasurer UP for the light lamping set. As we embark on this, I would kindly request all these dignitaries to stay back here. As we embark on this journey of research, we would like to launch the Book of Abstracts. It is a compilation of all the 11 abstracts that were shortlisted from the Stage 1 shortlisting. These were the top 11 entries that we received from all over the country. Now I would like to call architect Vijay Ramchandran towards the dais to share his thoughts about this initiative of NASA India.
Thanks to the NASA team, the current office bearers, but also the previous, for initiating this. It's a really, I think it's wonderful that there is this initiative, and I hope it, you know, becomes a regular feature of the NASA conventions. There isn't enough. I mean, all of us know this for a fact. Those of us who are teaching, we were talking about it at breakfast in the morning today. That there isn't really a lot of critical writing or academic writing really on Indian architecture, and it's tough to find. And so this is hopefully giving some of you an avenue to express yourself, those of you who are already writing and thinking about architecture in those terms. But it's also to help initiate maybe an interest that some of you may have latently, that you develop a way to think about your work and write about it, or think about someone else's work and write about it. And it develops a certain rigor by which you look at things. So it's really wonderful that we initiated it. We had some amazing responses. And yeah, really looking forward. It's also great to have the three of you today as part of the jury. I'm really looking forward to the conversations, and I hope all of you enjoyed and you continue to do it every year. So thanks for inviting us. Thanks for hosting us. And yeah, I hope it's going to be a great day. So thank you.
Today, also we also have academic and practitioner architect Kiran Kumar Sir, associate professor at Wadia Center for Architecture, who has been generously co-moderating the initiative of NIRC. He also won the Louis I. Khan Medal for his master's thesis at Central University. I kindly request Kiran Sir to share a few words with our audience.
So I maybe use the opportunity to even introduce the jurors. How did we come up with the theme idea? So when we were discussing on what it can be written, it was very broad. I don't know how many schools teach Frampton. So in our school, in our university syllabus, we have to teach Frampton, Alexander, Charles Dickens, who are like all opposites in what they think about it, and it gives a good opportunity to talk to students about certain ideas about architecture. So I thought me and Vijay discussed reading Frampton would be a good point, even if you agree with him or disagree with him, to use it as a point of echo to sort of write your own thinking. And unlike other styles, I think critical regionalism is not a style per se, but it is a sort of an inquiry which looks at modernism critically and gives you an opportunity to also deviate from it. And very simply, we thought if anybody is going to attempt to do the research paper, at least they'll read an essay in the point of doing this. So that's the background to this. That so you would read Frampton's essay, you could be critical about it, you could align from it, or you could deviate from it. And most of people who write know that you can't write on a blank paper. It's always good to write as a response to reading first. So the paper allows you to read first, maybe pick up a word and connect it to something in your own context from the college you are in, and expand on the idea. So I think NASA is doing a great thing by initiating reading and writing. So we also look forward for today's session. Thank
Today, we also have with us the Dean of the host campus, 184, Dr. Shweta Chaudhary ma'am. I would like to invite her to share a few kind words with us.
Good morning, everyone. Come on, guys. Good morning, ma'am. I'm sure the front row would be louder. पूछ के देखो. We still have the zeal. Hey, ma'am. Good morning, guys. Good morning, ma'am. Come on, good morning, guys. Good morning. NIRC का क्या होगा? Guys, that's all we can do about the world. Find problems, raise your voice, and solve them. That's all we are here about. अगर उसमें हिचकिचाएंगे तो काम कैसे चलेगा? Please उसमें ना हिचकिचाओ. Be bold enough, be strong enough, have all the content, because that's what is going to be the loudest. And that's what I think we are doing here today. Then let's see what you've read and let's see what problems you intend to solve, because the bosses are sitting on the front row choosing to do the best. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks for sparing your good time. And I hope the profession becomes stronger every day and we are able to carry forward this country, which has huge ambitions and huge ideas and a population of all of us, which is going to make it worthwhile to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's always inspiring to listen to you. Next, I would like to call upon 468th year National President Likhit Jain to share his kind words.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you to all our moderators, all our jurors, and as well as our paper presenters, and who all have participated in the NASA India Research Conference. As told by Trupti, that it was an initiative of NASA India Research Cell that was started in the 62nd year to have a broader perspective in terms of research in architecture and to understand where the students in architecture could develop their research papers and etc. And the 67th year council had that initiative started for the NASA India Research Conference. And we are very glad to have Sir Bijoy and Sir Kiran here as our moderators, as well as Anita ma'am and Gauri ma'am and Sir Leon as our jurors for this session. And we are very glad to have all the participants across India being here presenting the papers, and two of them also joining online due to constraints. But we are very happy as NASA India Council to initiate this, and we look forward in the coming future to have more and more participation with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Likhit. Now I would like to hand over the further proceedings to the NASA India Research Conference to our National Treasurer Yukti. She will be taking up from here. Thank you so much.
Good morning to everyone who has taken their time to be present here today. I am Yukti, currently serving as the National Treasurer for 68th year of NASA India, and I shall be host for today. Before we begin the research paper presentation, I would like to go over a few rules first. Everyone will be given a total of 10 minutes to present, and after that, we'll have a 5 minutes round of questioning from the jury. The total duration should not, we'll try it for it to not exceed 15 minutes because of the time constraints. With this in mind, let us now start with the very first edition of NASA India Research Conference. The first two papers shall be presented online due to the unavailability of the authors. So now I would like to call upon the first entry for the day, Aniket Shinde, to take the stage. He shall be presenting online. Apologies, we'll just take a minute to set the thing up. Right. Is there any of the participants who would like to share their experiences about the about participating in the first edition of NASA India Research Conference? How was it like to be a part of the very first edition of NASA India Research Conference that all of you 11 people have completed successfully for this time?
Good morning, everyone. It's Vidishri Kulkarni, and I'm from Brick School of Architecture, Pune. Honestly speaking about the topic and the experience, it was a great thing or a food for brain that I would say because thinking about what currently the problems that we can identify and maybe defining the problem is something which is a great task and like is it really a problem and so pointing up a problem is not just a task that we have to complete, but even we need to give up a solution that is efficient, that is actually practical, and it's enough for everyone to execute it to the fullest, and which can be a solution to the thing that has been identified. So this paper was a great opportunity for us to actually identify what is the gap and give up a solution to it. So yeah, it was really a great experience for me. Thank you. Hi everybody, I'm Nana Pradhan and I'm from Jindal School of Art and Architecture and I'm in my fourth year. So participating in this conference, personally for me, I think I got to read a lot more about architects, about works, what is happening, and a lot of studies which I encountered, which was really fascinating because it was beyond the scope of what I'm learning in college right now. So I think firstly for me, apart from writing my own paper, it was the part where I got to read a lot more and yeah, just explore new ideas and new thoughts. Yeah. Thank you. We'll run into some technical error here and we shall start with online presentations later. Meanwhile, I think we can have one offline presentation first. I would like to call Simran Taj T. Hubali for the first presentation of the day.
There has been a slight change in the guidelines. We'll have 15 minutes for presentation and 5 for questions. Respected jury, faculty, and peers. My name is Silvan Taj from Z506. I'll be presenting my paper, The Algorithmic Vernacular, Who Designs When Code Decides. The problem I address is as algorithms and AI become design partners, what happens to the cultural memory in architecture? So, as we all know that vernacular traditions, that is mud walls that breathe, jalis that cool, courtyards that host ritual, are not just forms; they are codes of living. They come from soil, climate, and social practice. But today, another kind of code is rising, that is the algorithmic code. It comes not from soil but from data optimization and global data sets. And so the dilemma appears, will AI amplify belonging or will it resolve identity into places novelty? In the profession right now, two extremes dominate. One is fear that AI will replace architects and erase craft. The other is surrender, that we should let machines design everything and simply marvel at their outputs. So I argue that both extremes are wrong. What we need is a middle path, where the power of code is guided by the intelligence of vernacular craft. Theoretically, this problem is not new. Long before algorithms, Indian architects faced the challenge of balancing modernity and tradition. As you can see, the Doshi Sangat, with its concrete walls sitting in lush courtyards, is both global and deeply local. Korea's Jawahar Kala Kendra encodes cosmology into contemporary cultural space. Both show us hybrid making is possible. Now, the algorithm is the next collaborator. The question is not how we use it, but how we instruct it. Algorithms are optimizers, not authors. We amplify what they are trained on. If trained only on efficiency, they will produce all this novelty. But if trained on cultural rules, proportion, threshold, and material rhythms go on hand in hand. My theoretical stance is that architecture must remain a human author, with architect as translator in between vernacular wisdom and computational logic. The field case studies that I've chosen are case one, that is Ant Studio. The terracotta cooling walls combine artisan craft with parametric airflow analysis. Here, algorithms optimize airflow But identity and material knowledge come from potters. Code respects craft here. Case 2 is morphogenesis. The climate driven forms use parametrics not for style but performance. Deep verandas, porous skins, and responsive geometry. These results are computational but also contextual. Case 3 is the smarten technologies. At the scale of cities, their AI tools optimize mobility and density. But without cultural input, such systems risk building efficient but alien urban fabrics. These cases illustrate a spectrum. On the one end, craft informs code. On the other, code erases craft. The field proves my point that the problem is not the tool, but what we feed into the tool. Reiteration of my assertion. So I return to my assertion that is the middle path that we choose. My contribution is a workflow of three steps. That is, first, document craft with artisans and communities to record rules of making, brick bonds, courtyard proportions, jali patterns, the logic of threshold. Second, encode rules. Translate those into computational constraint. A brick bond rhythm, for example, can be turned into parametric conditions. So the algorithm generates variety but within a cultural framework. Third, iterate with feedback. Prototypes are tested with craftspeople and users who refine details which no algorithm can judge. Tactile feel, ritual meaning, and emotional resonance. It's pragmatic hybridity. Machines do what they do the best, that is, optimize. Humans do what we do the best, interpret meaning. Together, they produce architecture that is both performative and rooted. So, to conclude, let me restate my provocation that is, who designs when code decides? My answer is that the architects design, but only if they accept a new role. Not the isolated genius, not the passive operator, but the translator who teaches machines what matters. The vernacular is not frozen history, it's the living intelligence. If we ignore it, algorithms will generate placeless novelty. If we encode it, algorithms can amplify belonging. The future of architecture then is not about rejecting technology or surrendering to it. It is about building bridges between soil and software, between ritual and optimization. So I leave this line to you. Algorithms are amplifiers, not authors. It is our responsibility to decide what they amplify. Let us rise from the soil and code together. Thank you. Now we would like to open the questions from journalists.
Thank you very much. That was a really interesting presentation. And I like your idea that we use algorithm not as a thing that thinks on behalf of architects, but it becomes a tool that architects use. I have a slightly conceptual question. What is the relationship between architecture and culture? Could you elaborate on that?
So, today we are living in a world where AI is taking over architecture. So, basically, we code something or like input something into AI. which basically doesn't know the vernacular forms. It just know it gives us what we exactly give to it, but doesn't give into the vernacular forms that is already present. So it doesn't go deeply rooted into the memory like jalis, mud walls, and the material. So if we give it the authorship, that would be a placeless novelty. So architecture is somewhat related to.
Okay, I have two brief, these are suggestions really, and you can think about it. The idea of the vernacular is definitely an important thing for, those of us who live in places that have long architectural traditions. Yet, if you look at the kind of spaces that most of us inhabit, they are very similar to environments around the world. So, while the idea of the vernacular is very important, the reality of contemporary architecture is that an apartment block or a shopping mall in the cities in Jaipur, in Bangalore, in Ahmedabad is pretty much the same as an apartment block or a shopping mall in Bangalore, in Barcelona, China, or whatever. So I think it's important to not get caught up in the nostalgia of the vernacular, but also recognize what modern built environments uh, are actually made up of. And the second thing, the relationship between architecture and culture, again, to sort of cut a very, very long story short, it's a shifting relationship. So you and I, for instance, may not have any affinity to a house built of mud walls. We haven't grown up in places like that. Culture changes, architecture also changes, and our cultural ideas of architecture, home, environment also constantly change. So, what algorithms are operating on the basis of our collective ideas. But you are right that what we feed into those collective ideas, so what we have to constantly look at is the range of environments that make up our everyday lives. And therefore, what are the kind of benchmarks that large language models or any kind of AI is working on? So I think that bit of your paper was a very, very valid concern that what we input is what we output. What I'm suggesting is think more critically and more expansively of the kind of environments that make up our lives and not just the vernacular. And it's not just a question of forms, there's also craft, there's also craftspeople, there are material realities. So there are a number of other things that could probably find mention in your paper.
Thank you. I'll look at that.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I think it was an amazing presentation. But somehow, continuing from what Gauri ma'am was mentioning, um, it's very important for us to understand vernacular not as a static event, uh, but it's a process. And we are in a generation where AI and ML is kind of planning to, at least we are in the realm of that threshold where we need to understand this phenomenon in a much better manner because our needs and the way we work with the society, the community that we define are all different now. So I feel this fear factor, we need to come out of it and we need to use. I think the presentation has taken very interesting examples where AI is used in a very conducive manner to kind of illustrate architecture which is more responsive. But at the same time, parametric architecture and AI is being criticized for a very wrong reason as well, because they are seen more at an authorship level, whereas you are saying that we can look at it as tools. But somehow it was not coming out in your abstract. So probably because when you explained it, it was coming out very clearly, but the abstract was giving a very different uh, intent. But it's quite interesting to know that this fear factor we need to come out of it. I wish you had elaborated further from those examples which you have looked at, uh, rather than again coming back to this fear factor. Because I think we are in a phase where we need to kind of get more clues about how we can use these realms and thresholds in a much, more like a tool rather than others. Because it always comes at the tail end where you are actually kind of making a prediction using these tools. Rather than that, what you kind of instruct, it can generate very interesting things because our needs and functions that we request from these architectural productions are very different compared to what vernacular was earlier. So I think you are actually questioning the idea of vernacular. Is it a process or is it a product? Got it. No? So uh, I think that scope of process could have been elaborated much more rather than coming back to the first time. Thank you.
Well, okay.
All right. So it's a stimulating presentation, but I have a couple of major questions. So if you can just go back to, your slide on Ant Studio and stuff. Yeah. So my first sort of major objection to some of the stuff that you were saying on your paper, there's a conceptual slippage between parametric architecture and artificial intelligence. Um, Simply put, uh, so that image of Ant Studios, have you gone and visited it? Is that a rendering or is that an actual structure?
It is an actual structure.
Yeah, the actual structure is built in the backyard of SPA. All right. And if you look at it, the the algorithm and the parametrics that they used for it were hugely problematic, given that the surface was changing. And if you actually go and see, they should have made the tiles smaller, etc., as the curves were more pronounced, etc. So that actually, if you go and see it, it's not very nice. But majorly, the two things. One is the idea that anyway, so that was one. Another major issue is that I'm a little worried about your three example. I don't know how Sachdev's example is there. Uh, if you ask me from given your provocations of your conference, which is on epochal change. This is perhaps one of the worst examples of ecological design because Sachdev builds the whole thing over the nalas of Delhi in the 80s, and because this became a commercial success, it actually has become the blueprint for the whole of Delhi where we're building over the nalas. So that, I mean, as students of architecture, I'm just telling you, don't get seduced by some of these things. The third and the most sort of important issue that I have with you is who says vernacular architecture is not coded? There were cast codes completely dealing with the way in which your old architecture was done, right? In fact, big problems with Kenneth Frampton's other work, Tectonics, for instance, is that he said, and in that he uses the what is the Sanskritized version, or he says that tectonics comes from carpentry. So why is carpentry coded while as mud construction not, right? So we assume that there are no codes that dictated vernacular architecture, while as there were. Some were included in the code, some were excluded. So that uh, so the idea that the code only exists now in algorithmic architecture is problematic. So I would ask you to go back to your notion of code, right, and understand how that notion of code, what gets coded, what doesn't get coded, what is coded in today's world, what doesn't get coded in today's world. Those are the things that I would have liked some amount of analysis on. It's so, in that sense, it still sort of skirts the surface. And the big issue is the parametrics conflated with artificial intelligence. All right. In one, you literally are the master of the algorithm, while as in the other, you are using someone else's algorithm and as a learning model, etc. So there is, and again, just to sort of pick in your paper at some point if you're interested, like in the 90s, when I was a student, there was this wonderful genetic algorithms that we were using, which looked at what is this? Not the Vitruvian house, etc. So we took traditional sort of elements of the building, and through coding, we had the computer generate how forms could be created. We realized that some of it, I mean, most of it, 95% was garbage, whereas 5% was not, right? And so there are very interesting studies that were done. It's not like AI has just come about. There's about a 50, 60-year-old history to it. And there are some very interesting experiments with architecture that you should look at. All right? There.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Simran. I hope you're all finding it very enriching. Next up, we shall start with the online presentation of Aniket Shinde. His research paper is titled Applications of Indigenous Craft in Theme-Based Restaurants in Pune. Till then, if the jury wants to say a few things about the jury criteria of the presentations and how on what parameters will the presenters be judged in the NIRs.
Yeah, just I mean, Leon's comments, all of you made wonderful comments. The exciting thing about the provocation, which isn't a new provocation, is that in this really the onslaught of, to use maybe not the right word, the onslaught of technology and what it is throwing up at us. I think the provocation of the paper is that it needs to be tempered with something that then is rooted in a kind of cultural memory. And so I think your comment about just widening the perspective of how do you understand history and memory, and then how does that then, in a way, get coded to inform AI was kind of the interesting provocation of the paper. But of course, I think Leon's comments are really wonderful for the young researcher. And I hope you will sort of take that on, particularly in this relationship between parametricism and algorithm. And that's a wonderful dialectic to sort of investigate. Yeah, I was surprised to see some of the examples that they've written, particularly. Uh, but I mean, not to diss him, but it is important for us to look back at these, like for instance, you're really fascinated with the vernacular, but also to then understand the conditions in which those kinds of buildings are made. And it is a changing paradigm. So if you're looking at a traditional settlement, then coded in them not only is building systems, but also social conditions that inform who makes what, who has control over what, and who defines what gets done. So those are also things that have. I mean, there's a social angle to it as well. We really enjoyed your abstract. I mean, just to be honest, and we're happy that you did the paper and now have the basis to go forward. So thank you.
May I just add one thing, and this is sort of also in advance. And as architects, we are trained to think big about some of the large problems and large, complicated problems for which there aren't easy solutions. As research projects, the expectation usually is to be able to offer precise insights. So many of you may find that we are saying your big questions are great, but what you're suggesting is needs more work. Please don't take that as a personal shortcoming. That's the nature of doing research in architecture. There are PhD students who pick up large projects, and then at that time also we'll say, "Arey, but you should have said something more specific." So just bear that in mind, that your what we expect you to do is to tackle a large problem and to be able to look at its many facets and not necessarily find a solution, but to be able to think in the right direction. So, and I second Vijay, what he's saying is you're thinking in the right direction. Of course, all this stuff requires a lot of work. If any of it was easy, it would already have happened. So we will laud you for picking up big questions, but we will also suggest that there needs to be more to be looked at.
What do you want us to answer that question of what parameters we can use? Well, um,
Yeah, yeah. So the idea here is again, uh, what I'd second everything that was said before me. Uh, I so the what I look forward in a research paper is to see the student grapple with the murkiness of the subject. It doesn't matter. We're not going to find answers. I mean, after 25 years, I'm no closer to giving you any answers than I was when I was a student. So we're not expecting like, prepackaged, like you come up with some major insights. But the idea is that it's that culture of critical thinking that has been mentioned a couple of times. We just need to see how you're grappling with it. And each paper is so different that actually it would be based on the strength of that paper. And I just also want to take another 20 seconds to say that look, architecture is predicated on us offering you the antithesis so that you will arrive at a synthesis. It's not meant to sort of it's not meant to kind of completely undo your foundations of what you're thinking. So unfortunately, it's the nature of the game of how we sort of offer feedback. So I hope you all take it in a more I mean, will take it constructively. And it's not that we're not happy with any of the work, it's just that we're trying to push you in certain directions. All right.
Thank you, sir, for making it more easier to understand for everyone how this paper can be better understood by the jurors and how the grading can be happened. So now I would like to ask some Yusek to volunteer and tell us about how the okay, I think we can start then. Yes. Hello, Ankit, can you hear me? Good morning, Ankit. Can you hear us? Yes, Ankit, you're audible. You have 15 minutes to present the paper. You can start the presentation now. Hello, Ankit. You may begin the presentation. Yes.
During the contracting texture with light effect, also the vertical diamonds and that can highlight two lines and also the half volumetric wall. In material analysis, in this one, there is a segment of raw finished bamboo, partition of exposed latex stone, also in this the missing hidden door is used when latex stone wood for Indian furniture, terracotta granite was used for bar counters. In this code, the resource cut out as a wall treatment, removing in color and blue of light overtones to highlight when exposed in partition was the findings from the CO2 food analysis are the candidates not an expert 70 to 50% of material are bamboo and wood. In 60% of restaurants, traditional chopper kitchen utensils were retained as architecture and stone are also employed for furniture and structural purpose. Only three more partition and culture company are made out of terracotta. In restaurants, approximately 85% of installations are architects need to do it India. Regardless of the style of the restaurant, 60% of furniture application is done in the India. And it focus the architects and installation, artificial lighting is done here. Order to select new walls to do the textures and paint are more concentrated. The conclusion, scientifically, according to this study, 85% of Indian restaurants made it intellectual as architecture ideas, and regardless of the type, 50% of furniture application is done using basic stabilized care among the four application types. Those are depending number of restaurants are constructed using conventional methods. When either the restaurants are retrofitted or sustainable solutions are made to the design process to create a food. Majority of the time, the material needles are carried in from nearby areas or the restaurant is designed to what is available there. Source of copper is generally available in Chennai. Copper people usually are used as articles and also Maharashtra is a prominent hub for copper art which is frequency. And sandals often used to which is readily available is very available here and they are the trade level in the area. These are the special thing for the research. Thank you.
Take for questions from the jury.
Aniket, thank you for the presentation. It was interesting.
I can't,
I think he can't hear us.
I can't.
Hello, can you hear us? Aniket?
Yeah.
No. Let's find out which mic was.
It's video actually. It was hello.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah. Can you hear us? Yes, Aniket, thank you for the presentation. It was good. I have two questions. How do you define, because your title says application of indigenous craft in tea-based restaurants, but how do you define indigenous craft?
can you repeat the second question?
No, the first question, how do you define indigenous craft?
Okay. Indigenous craft means it is the craft which is available locally over there and which can be used. That's why in Pune there are we two factories. There were Maharashtrian art. For the Maharashtrian art, there are offered as a material, often 50 and
the material was permanently used, not to the bamboo, not to the terracotta material. Because these are used with cement, so it is usually over there presented and included in the Maharashtrian local art also.
Okay. Yeah, I think you're going a little beyond the material selected, but how locally it is being used. I think this assumption is, in fact, taking it as a static way of looking at vernacular or indigenous craftsmanship. Okay. Uh, so, uh, so while you're actually attempting to understand the different cases that you have taken, what we are seeing is that the paper actually it lacks a critical question because there is an assumption which is already taken about indigenous craft as a static way of using a particular material in a particular way by the region. Got it? And its application, you have taken it as so. This assumption is causing a little bit trouble in the research that it lacks a critical question. That is it correct? Are we consuming it as a static example? So this was my question. Yeah, thank you.
So I don't know very much about Maharashtra, but you use the term, no, Tambatali. What is that? Is that is that an area? Or is it a shop? What is Tambatali?
Tamil is the area in Pune where that materials are available. There are specific areas where the specific that materials are available, like Bogutari, the bamboo or bamboo trees are available. For the copper, it includes and copper material.
All right. So I really had I needed some clarity on that. But so the thing that for me was problematic is that um, you in your title itself you're looking at theme-based restaurants, right? But we never got an idea of what the themes within the restaurants were and whether the interior design reflected those themes. So in your presentation, the names of the restaurants also were not mentioned. And so, like, unless one knows those parameters well in advance, can one make any kind of major, what could I say, comments on whether it's satisfied the criteria or not? So that was kind of missing. So I would have liked to have seen the name of the restaurant, what was the theme that they were trying to achieve, and the other thing that kind of was also missing, the thing when as much as we like to, we think of architecture as the be all and end all of our existence. Now, if looking at a restaurant, I'm also looking at the kind of food they serve. So that's why I'm asking you. So, for instance, if I was making Chinese food in a restaurant, maybe I would take a particular theme that could reflect that kind of cuisine, right? So, that was kind of we don't know what was there. So it would have been nice to have actually seen some of those things sort of pulled out. So the connection with the theme, when I'm talking about theme, what are the kinds of cuisines that they were making, how they were going about then reflecting the interior design with the dining experience. Those were some of the things that one would have liked to have seen. So, like, so the paper ends up without getting into, I think, the complexities of restaurant design. So we are left with the very basic thing of saying that, 80% did this. And the other thing that I was very curious is what is a basic table and chair? Uh, you used it a couple of times. What is a basic table and chair?
First, the architectural training, basically Toyota mostly Maharashtrian things were used in all the restaurants. Next, the name of the restaurant is it's a confidential instead of either the name of the restaurant and the photograph. That's why they are mentioned case one, case two, case three. And then basic chair and table, I mean the conventional uh, chair and table, not the physical form of the wooden form of chair, related to that theme or the That's craft.
All right, but okay, I'll pass it on to the next judo.
Thank you, Aniket. It was you're looking the subject of your paper is something that is now quite common, where restaurants have particular themes and the entire interiors are done looking at local crafts. I think you've also sort of demonstrated that you understand, how a research project is done. You're talking about anonymity. So I think all of that is really good and in place. I really have another perspective that I would like you to think about. When you talked about how craft is used in restaurants, the general sense that one gets from your paper is that you're thinking of this as a good thing. That the ways in which craft is used currently, it's ticking a lot of boxes. Local craftspeople are getting an outlet. You can even get some ITBC points. So you're looking at it as a good thing. In any research project, it's also useful to look at the opposite of whatever line you are pursuing. So, what would that opposite be? The key thing with any indigenous craft, and if you pursue this further, you will realize that there is a lot of scholarship around the idea of politics of indigenous people and indigenous craft. Now, one of the things that happens when interior designers use crafts of this kind is that there is no acknowledgement of the craftspeople. And that is one of the major divisions between indigenous craft and modern art, for instance. Like when you look at modern art, the name of the artist is known. But with indigenous crafts, the name of the craftsperson is not known. Now, why does that matter? It is because whether we think that the craftsperson has any agency or what do we mean by agency? Creative. Did the person making the copper pot, they have any creative agency in what can they explore? Or do they have to produce things which are of a certain kind that the restaurant wants? Now, with a lot of the ways in which indigenous craft is used by the interior designer's name will be known, but not necessarily the craftsperson. Which basically means, and the craftsperson is becomes a person who simply has to reproduce a kind of form depending on how a market wants it, right? So, and I think that's what Anita ma'am also mentioned, that if you look at, so what are the problems of this way of using indigenous craft? That could be something that you could have built into your conclusion, that there is a limitation to innovation, there is a sort of invisibility of the craftsperson. So these are other perspectives that you can look at, which then also build into, so how does one look at this whole aspect? And the other minor point, minor, major, whatever, is all the elements that you mentioned. It would be good to know how essential are they to the functioning of the restaurant. The more essential they are, the more central indigenous craft is to the restaurant. But if it is only decoration, the moment indigenous craft goes out of fashion, something else will come in. So that's also a way of positioning what is the value of indigenous craft within the restaurant setup. Yeah. So these are things that you could think about and maybe incorporate at a later stage.
Thank you, ma'am. I will definitely put this point for your system for I will forward my research paper. Thank you.
Uh, just from our moderator point of view, I think when we selected this particular thing, I think the paper would question itself what is a themed restaurant. Like it's because it's a conflicting thing, right? You have to, let's say, you have to do a Chinese restaurant in Bangalore. What do you respond to? The Bangalore restaurant, the building in which you are in, or the theme of the restaurant itself? So I think there was an inherent conflict in the position of the restaurant, and maybe it would give an opportunity to unpack that particular idea. But I think it's gone to more descriptive level, and with ma'am said, it's not taking a critical point of view. Maybe that's something. I mean, all these papers have multiple trajectories, but one of the intention was that you critically ask what is a themed restaurant in itself was. Yeah.
Thank you for presenting, Anike. Um, you may leave the meet now. We shall be starting with the next presentation by Kashika and Ritika. Kashika and Ritika, hello. You will have 15 minutes to present. Yes. You're able to hear?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so you can start presenting.
Yes. Keeping the brain very good. Understanding the architecture involved from the Yes. So our topic comes under the giving the method challenge of data. How we define a data boundary in a word that defines our solution. To leave like an express in there is so our objective forward leading paper was to understand how addiction is defined and in particular webinar. We recommend the objective is this review that a region is defined by strength and boundary statement. And these phases are further defined by food traditions, cultural practices, and intangible aspects identified. The approach that we went forward was a mixed method approach, which consists of majorly various sampling, which we further validated use on-site visits, and a visual survey and operating interviews, which accompanies that. So coming to the Chettinad region, the main reason that it shows Chettinad because of its features in partition mansions, which the resident district is dividing the whole entire region. So Chettinad in its style is rooted until now, which are owned by the Natakode Chettinad community. This community people have these ornate mansions that have established for symbolizing their wealth and
Just a second, guys. Can you put the screen on presentation mode? That's better. Slideshow, yeah. In the bottom, you'll have the option. Yeah, in your PPT, you'll have the option below. So present the screen.
There's slideshow option there right above, beside animations. The option there.
well, I would looking at that way. It's not in
No, no, no. In your, yeah, over there. No, not in Google Meet, in your Microsoft PPT. The software, yes, open it. Share your screen. Yes, and then, yes, correct. Perfect, thank you.
yeah. So the main thing is it was architecture because of its match. The distance is that quite artificial kind of the entire region. And we also know that the Chettinad region is spread over various multiple villages, which is dominated by the Nandpare Chettiars. This community people are defined by their massive structures and the ornate mansions that show their wealth and the social power. These mansions were not merely the residences, but marks the identity, their culture, their social activities, and their way of their daily life. So, according to an UNESCO study, we observed that it was earlier 96 villages which then rendered the survey, but
The substance that these imposing margins are almost ghosted. So we wanted to know what was the factor which had which these margin had that they remained as buildings, yet they were not fully clean. Yeah, the methodology that first we went through was the different literature case studies that was related to the gender aspect. So when we go through all those papers, we identified the factors and the objective. So now coming over to objective, the first thing that we identified was that the 96 villages that the Chettinad style of architecture was spread was declined to 73 villages. These 73 villages, and then we also identified the three clusters, which was marked by 9 planted. Our approach was to identify three villages in those three clusters, which was the Aryapuri, Palatur, and Telasivampati. And then we validated through the current over the years, over 5 years, which was 2003, 11, 15, and 20. These years were then marked through visual survey, visual, and then the main thing, the other objective was the visual survey that gave us an idea of how spirit of the place also affects the definition of a region. So coming to the exact mapping, visuals on over the work from given working. So you can see 2003, 2011, 2020, and 2025, which we validated in Berkeley. So the exact mapping was done by identifying the courtyard for the intros, which we call in covered. So the number of courtyards were used as the identifying factor for each row. We observed that there are one courtyard houses, two courtyard houses, three courtyard houses, and three plus or multiple courtyard houses in most of the villages. So the mapping was done for the 10 years to observe whether there is a decline or rise in the wind surface. These area mapping was then validated through on-site surveys. So yeah. Okay, so on the survey, we also had the open-ended interviews. So during the open-ended interviews, we were able to identify four parameters, which was the social, cultural, architectural, attitudinal, and economic, which was then subdivided into few connect forms so that it gave us a quantitative analysis of all those stages. So these open-ended surveys gave us a visual and as well as the people's opinion about how these structures are being used now, and then how are these rooted to the region and defining the region. We also talked to different people from of different kinds of dimensions, starting from the single courtyard till the multiple courtyard. So good to different ownership, like the owners, the original owners to the caretakers, which gave us a different opinion about how all these mansions are rooted and it is still intact until now. So coming to the conclusion for our video mapping and online visit, we get to the conclusion that there has been a decline in the margins from 2003 to the present. And further observing, it is noted that the large houses, that is, two courtyard or multiple courtyard houses, have a tendency to remain as such, but people don't hesitate as such to disrupt or demolish the single courtyard housing. We also noted that the lasting effect of these mindset is also closely linked to the emotional value it holds with the owner and how they are connected to their heritage and artistry. In this major draft engineering, in the future Jaipur, which is one of the smallest mansions, smallest villages, there is a decline from 40 mansions in 2011, 32 mansions in the present. The visuals are yeah. Okay. During the visual survey and observations, we gone to three different sheets of antique houses like the Fata treatment, the ornamentation, the heritage structures, which gave us different opinions which changed from each village to each village. The main noticing factor that we observed was the Telesival Patti, which is near to the first land temple, which is the Elatambodi. The Elatambodi, from the Elatambodi, these Telesival Patti mansions had an influence of all those religious cultures. So the Bhatha treatment of all the mansions there had an influence of all those. While at the same time, Aryapuri, which is a smaller village but a bit far away, had a different kind of ornamentation. But when at the same time, their flooring were also the mining factors which affected from each village to the other. So that's our observation that the drift of this would define a region, and there are minor differences from each region to each region depending on when the village originated or how close that village is to a temple or how close it is, how close it was originated when the British came in and things like that. Further, we wanted to also discuss about how the frequency is moving from getting deteriorated or just letting it be. Right now, there is a great tourism market in Chandigarh as well. More centered towards Karinguri. Clearly, the other 72 villages are rather uneven. So, there is a great attractive use potential to turn the online mountains into career museum or heritage hotel. The other issue was maintenance and material, which was which when speaking to the owners, it was that they couldn't maintain such elaborate large houses and they needed large manpower and financial limitations. So when so goes into adaptive zeros, that issue can also be tackled. Material is that the quality of materials and the skills available to the worker is it only was compared to how it was 100 years ago. Therefore, even if they renovate or look at things to the building, it doesn't last however it's supposed to. So, careful repair and restoration and active effort from conservationists should be taken into account while preserving the elaborate market. In conclusion, we would like to conclude that emission and expansion are different by cultural history, and therefore these functions define each region, each village, and therefore each village makes up the whole of Tamil Nadu, which is a historically very strong region, but the deteriorating numbers are a huge matter of concern. So, if not preserved and conserved, it's being rather concerning. And in order to do that, we need to take efforts to protect the legacy as well as
Opening for questions. Thank you, Kashika and Ritika, for that presentation. So I wish to know one major question because any problem, I think a deeper understanding of that typology which you are studying, especially the Chettinad houses in this case, is very important. You spoke about single courtyard, multiple courtyard houses. How do you define them? How do you understand them? Why is that it is built like that? What are the parts of a Chettinad house? This typology. It is much beyond Mutram. Definitely, Mutram is courtyards, and in Tamil or local language, it is called Mutram. But it's much more than that. I really want to know about your understanding of the typology.
Okay, so many Chettinad as a residence had many elements to be revealed, but which mention to be not being worthy to spend those 4 times was because that was a major factor which was visually active. The people living in there was identified to them. So he went to the different villages. The people were key about the number of courtyards and the way they look through the courtyard. They move from one courtyard to another. And each space has at least one toilet or a courtyard which is combining all those together. So we thought that would be the main factor, which defining factor to arrive at the typology.
Can I come in? I think it is much more than that. It is actually divided into Mugappa, Valava, Random Getter, Pin Getter. So it goes like that, actually, and each of which had a gender specialty, gender dynamics with it. Who used the front part, who used the rear part, and thereby the materials and the way it was detailed from Kapu was very different from that of Vallabha. Vallabha was used for a larger congregation and for rituals, whereas Randamkettu was largely dominated by women, and Pinketta is the kitchen and all of that, the well. It's used by the, because the served and the master and the servant was very dominating way in which the society worked. So first of all, my question is about, because your question, I mean, your title says that understanding the architectural boundaries of Chettinad. I wish if you had gone in that direction also, you would understand much more than that. Are they regional productions or much more than that? The boundaries which created such typologies are not limited to Tamil Nadu, but it's much more than that. So I wish the research could have taken that path also. But meanwhile, I'm finding that you are actually seeing the amount of the degree of deterioration happening to these Chetnaf houses. Then the research title should have been slightly different, because the problem which you're inquiring is very different from what the title says. But it is amazing to understand the borders and boundaries of Chettinad House, its production, who are Natukota Chettiars, and, the kind of wealth of knowledge that comes from South and Southeast Asian countries are much more than what is limited to Tamil Nadu. So I think it's slightly deceptive about the title and the nature of work done. Okay, so I don't know, end of the research, it kind of limits itself to the degree of deterioration, how many of these houses are existing, how much has been erased. But it doesn't talk about why it is being erased. And also, the conclusion is very immediate, because, as we were mentioning in the previous presentations, also, it's not necessary that we come to how we should restore this, because it's a big question. The easiest answer is make them into museums or palaces or wedding ceremony and event spaces and things like that. But there are other ways of looking at these typologies, because minimum square feet of this kind of typologies is 800 square meters. It's huge for a family to kind of conserve or preserve. Largely, it's preservation that's happening. So I think there are other methods of working with adaptive reuse. I think so. You have bypassed many of these possible questions into quick answers like museums or palaces or hotels or event spaces and things like that. Okay, so that's it. Stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just pick up from 2 points. When I heard the title Boundaries, I was also thinking that maybe you will touch on the trading networks of the Chettiars and the ways in which architectural influences traveled across the trading networks. Because these kinds of mansions, there's a window literally from the late 18th to just around World War One. That's when you begin to see mansions across all the places that are tied with trading networks. So, Burma, Chettinad, the maritime centers of Gujarat, Africa, Middle East. So, there is a very specific geography to these kinds of mansions. And you find similar kinds of tiles, similar kinds of decoration. So, I thought maybe you might, but that is something for you to look at. That the boundary is actually not a geographical boundary, it's actually a network. So that could be very interesting to look at. And yeah, just another thought which ma'am has already mentioned about this question of value and decline. So again, just picking up conceptually, the first paper today was talking about vernacular architecture as a sort of cultural code. If we use that as a framework, when particular kinds of buildings go into decline, it also means that the cultural relevance of those kinds of forms no longer exist. So it is also useful to recognize the reverse, that certain forms become redundant. They are just no longer able to sustain the kinds of lives that people lead. Which is not to say that buildings need to be demolished, and I think that that's not the point. But I think it's useful to not assume that all buildings are valuable and all buildings must always be taken care of. And I think that is where museums and things play a role. They hold on to material evidence of past lives and past cultures when our everyday life can no longer support. So I think it's just useful to bear that in mind. As architects, we love all buildings, old buildings, but it's not always possible to sustain that. Thank you.
I think all three of us are sort of picking up on the same things. Um, So are you, if you do go into your Chettiar houses, and that was something that was missing in your presentation. It seemed that there was satellite analysis that you all use to try and identify courtyards, as well as just facades. There was really no engagement with the interior and the materials, etc. So that I think is the reason why we have these kinds of questions. So I'm like, so that's something that there's a big problem with, because if you go into the even the in the foyer of these houses, you'll see Belgian glass mirrors, you'll see chandeliers, you'll see and then if you went into the first courtyard, I don't know the technical terms for it, you'd actually see Burma teak columns. You'll see that main sort of bureau where the Chettiar sat and gave money to the laborers. All of that. There's a whole sort of, and I mean, it could have been a very, very rich analysis. So the point here is, and I think I'd just like to point out, even though you have it in the abstract, you really need to change it, because typically what you're trying to say is a region is defined by its regional and cultural landscape. It's tautological. That is, it's like a snake eating its tail. What is the region? And I think I think conceptually there itself you'll have an issue, and I think it sort of plays itself out through the paper. So, from and to sort of just to add some of these things, right? Yes, the house is 800 meters squared, but over so many generations, and this is across India, the property has been subdivided and subdivided and subdivided. If you actually go into these houses, one family owns one room around the courtyard. That's it. And they let their elderly go there to die. It's an old age home where five or six of that generation are left there, and they hire three, four people to cook the food and this, that, and the other, and walk them from that room to the toilet. In fact, it's quite worrisome once you go inside there, because it's not even like all their food, etc., is placed in a single kitchen. It's actually kept in their rooms. Just they'll take out one handful of rice and make it. It's so worrisome. So even though it might look like a mansion, the way in which people are living there are very scary. And how do you subdivide a house? Now you have, yes, it might have so many rooms, but how does a property like that pass down six or seven generations? And what happens there? So, I mean, and that's what Nam's also telling you. You have some, maybe not all of it is conducive to today's lifestyle. But you see the same thing across places, all over India. You look at large bungalows in hill stations, look at Goa's landscape. All of it is it's suffering because of the same issue. So it would have been nice to actually wrestle with that and sort of deal with it. And I really think that it would have been nice for you all to have gone into these buildings. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kashika and Ritik. Thank you for joining. So those were the two presentations that we had online because the authors could not be present here physically. Now we shall be proceeding with the offline presentations. So next up we have Ashvi Jain and Kashish Achpelia. They shall be presenting a paper on transcending aesthetics, the metamorphosis of vernacular forms in an era of globalization and digital innovation. I welcome you to the stage. Council members and everyone present. I'm Ashvi Jain
Ma'am, Kashish Australia.
from KL School of Architecture, Vivekananda. We are here to present a paper on titled on Transcending Aesthetic, the Metamorphosis of Vernacular Form in an Era globalization, and digital innovation. Before we begin, before we begin, we'd like to thank all of you for spending your time here and giving us this platform to hear. This research began with thought that became our guiding compass. Bernard University's quote, "The vernacular is not the style, but the process," that shaped how we thought in our research. We realized something. We realized something that vernacular architecture is generally assumed to be beautiful, sustainable, and rooted in culture. But we often forget, uh, we don't think about how those base principles could lead us to shape how our future can be defined, or our present times the architecture of the present time and the future can be redefined. So we thought of a question like how can we adapt vernacular architecture rather than not making it disappear at all. In the meantime, is there someone here, some unit secretary, some unit designee who would like to share your experience with the NIRC and how it has impacted the perception of research and student research in your college, in the students in your college, and how the faculties in your college viewing the NASA India Research Conference? Z302 unit secretary here. So, in my college, the research thing of architecture is usually very celebrated, and the research in my college is usually very celebrated and appreciated by my faculties as well. The faculty is also very keen into research and they guide us very nicely. We also have a subject integrated in our academic curriculum, which is usually about it starts into the third year and it extends till the fourth year and fifth year till you continue your thesis and do your thesis. So there are faculty allocated to every student, particularly after third year, which goes on till the fifth year, and you keep on doing research and publishing the research papers in our college. And the faculty is very supportive about what initiative NASA India took in particular terms of the student driven conference. That was the first thing they like heard
there are usually conferences happening in the architects level or the practicing people level, but it was never like the student based. So they were pretty appreciated. They were pretty excited to know what NIRC is, and they also encourage students to take part.
Yes, thank you for your input. Let us resume the research presentation.
So I would like to continue. To understand how vernacular architecture evolves, we first look at culture. So architecture does not exist in isolation. It grows with the dance, music, arts, craft around, and the community. So taking the first example of Kuchipudi, the Kuchipudi dance. So we couldn't go to the site as in, but we did a desktop study. The Kuchipudi village in Andhra Pradesh, where the dance was born in the village courtyard and in the temple courtyard in the village squares. So the space shaped the form because of the spaces where the dance was performed. Because of that, the form was born. We compared it with Bharatanatyam, which is also a dance form. So in that, we observed that it started in courtyards, but eventually moved into theaters, like on proscenium theaters. So post that, we also compared it with in Kalamkari artisans in Pagana in Andhra Pradesh, where they used to dry the textiles in courtyards, open courtyards, and in terraces. That workspace also became a part of the craft. These examples shows us that the form always adopts to the space and the culture. But due to globalization, the buildings are becoming uniform, disconnected from the local context, and losing their adaptability. So our question became very simple but powerful. How do we guide this adaptation continuously, consciously in the 21st century? That's where our research gap emerged. We realized when many studies talked about vernacular architecture as heritage, but no one talked about how in modern times it can be adapted or how through digital innovation we can like increase it or amplify it. Our aim was to go beyond admiring the past. We wanted to decode its logic behind why is it so, why is it emotionally relevant. What happens when technology joins the conversation? We went through papers, projects, and theories to find out what was already existing, what was being spoken about vernacular architecture in Japan. Then we identified that vernacular is generally considered as climate responsive and culturally just. But there is no context of digital innovation and modern, like according existing according to the modern language. So instead of treating the whole methodology into a typical study, we built it like a framework grounded in literature, observation, and dialogue to explore this. To explore this, we defined three objectives. How to merge technology and culture in design, study the regionalist evolution of vernacular forms, and develop a framework for contextual authenticity. So our method was very systematic. We began with a deep dive into the literature study from studying from Rudowski to Hassan Fati, which made us distill into four key indicators that could bridge the tangible and intangible aspects of vernacular logic. So then we tested these four indicators on three of our case studies at different scales.
So these indicators helped us guide and select these case studies. So our first case study is Mazda City in Abu Dhabi. So imagine when you're standing in a narrow alley which is shaded. you feel a wind flowing. Like this is of the because the streets are aligned at the 45 degrees angle so that they make the wind flow. And then they have also used mashriyabas and shaded corridor spaces, which are traditional Arabic techniques, but they have reimagined it using computational design. So Masdar helped us understand that vernacular wisdom is not only about technology, but also traditions can be incorporated. It is like technology doesn't suppress traditions, it amplifies it. Next, imagine you are in the rural landscapes of Andhra Pradesh, where Vidyavanam is a school which fosters community well-being. So its major feature is the octagonal courtyard, which makes us feel that the Gurukul model has been re-evolved. So these are the sections of the school, and just didn't observe it, we actually measured it. So there, when we surveyed, the students were like, they were feeling comfortable without 83% of the students were feeling comfortable even without mechanical ventilation, and they 80% of the students felt a sense of belonging. So which proves that vernacular is not only about cultural resonance, it is also about emotional well being. Next, at a unit scale, we took Nisarga Art Hub, where the whole house is made up of fast itself because they have used reclaimed laterite to debris from demolished sites. So, where the major key focus and the key element is the roof, which is a sloped roof which collects rainwater but also doubles as a performance space. There are also skylights which help the gloomy interiors brighten up. So, from this case study, we understood that the building at a unit level can also be community oriented and also be adaptive. Uh, So when we conclude this, so our major focus was the scalar based approach, where in the urban scale we felt that the vernacular climate is being seen, but the human context is being ignored. At an institutional scale, the building is emotionally connecting, but the integration of technology was missing. And at a unit scale, the local craftsmanship was there, but does it become scalable? So these are the list of papers.
So a conclusion is one of awareness and not idealism. So we do not like this all the practices used in the three of the case studies. We do not want to idealize it. So vernacular evolution holds both fragility and strength. So uh, in like be adapted with empathy. So that is the whole point. And as we return to where we began, Rudovsky's word still guides us. The vernacular is not a style, but a process that continues through adaptation, through innovation, and through the spaces us through our through our spaces choose to tell. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have your paper was primarily about how the vernacular has transformed, and what you have identified is that you looked at a few examples, and in your assessment, in each of these transformations, there is something that's worked, and there are some things that have not worked, right? I have so my general impression is that your paper has been very meta. It's very kind of big picture, yeah, and which is great. And I think some of these, like we said at the beginning, some of these big questions are stuff that we grapple with. The thing with some of these big questions also is that in order to be able to engage with it meaningfully, you have to be able to ground it in something. And that's the bit where I felt maybe a little more. I didn't get a sense of the two of you engaging with these big questions, right? And so, with that, I just want to draw attention to a slightly meta point again, that how does one do research today? Right? Now, for your entire generation, also for us who are working as researchers now, there is so much information at your fingertips that the task of a researcher is to be able to pick out what makes sense and what you can connect. Which basically means that out of these, I don't know, millions and millions and millions of bits of examples and paperwork, I think deeper dive into existing ideas would have helped you shape this a little more meaningfully. Because to say that people have not looked at how vernacular architecture has transformed, actually, there was this character called Friedrich Gauss in the 1880s who worked with craftspeople to make some of the most important public buildings in Uttar Pradesh. So this has been a preoccupation for a very long time. And there is so much written about how the vernacular has been adapted into architecture that it would have helped to just generate an essay on ChatGPT to say, okay, how has this happened? And then use that as a starting point to say, what else are we talking about? And I'm saying that in your case because you mentioned that a lot of this has come from external sources. Right. So it is very important for you to connect it to your experience, what you know, so that it remains meta, but then we get a sense of why that question matters to you. So I'm struggling to sort of find your voices within this big picture question. And that is crucial because AI thinks for us now. But what makes us significant is what is the value that we are bringing to that question based on our experiences and our situation and our specific points of view. So I would have liked to see this a little more situated within your experience, your understanding. A meta comment to a meta paper. Okay.
Hello. Hello. Yeah, I think I completely agree with Rimam's point. Uh, you well opened the paper with saying Rudovsky's point that vernacular is not a style but a process. But I was also kind of struggling to see that how that process is being demonstrated or inquired within the paper was kind of probably you can strengthen that. So I think that's where I was finding it a little problematic. So one question I can ask you is, you open the paper or the presentation with Bharatanatyam originating from a courtyard kind of a spatial system to a procedure. Do you believe in this, and or do you agree to it? Uh, how do you say it? What is the citation for this? Because all of this is very important. Who told you that Bharatanatyam is originated within the courtyards? I hope you are getting my point across. So this deeper engagement with what we say is very important in research. And probably one of the cases, I think the cases been very varied also. So that kind of, no, you've been literally struggling to make the point across. So probably take one of the examples, make a deeper dive, understand what it is. And also, when we make statements, we need to be very convinced that, yes, it is like that. That is Bharatanatyam or Kuchipudi. I think you mentioned about Kuchipudi. Kuchipudi is originating from a courtyard kind of a spatial. It's a response from that kind of an art form. Who said this? From where do you get this? So all of this is very important. And also this process, vernacular as a process driven, you need to kind of navigate and follow a particular style or a particular regional uh, vernacular architecture, how it transformed. Uh, let's take from courtyard to proscenium, is your question. Probably that would have been much deeper than in the period examples, which kind of very quickly settle down to quick answers. You're trying to struggling to find out. Thank you.
I'm just going to sort of just deal with the limited portion of your three examples. All right. So if can you just go back to your first one, the Mazda, right? You kept on mentioning 45-degree angle streets. Are you meaning 90 degrees or 45 degrees?
45 degrees.
Where is it 45 degrees? As an architect who, for 5 years, you've been working on geometry, where is it showing you 45 degrees? And literally, I'm just sort of, I was also confused. I said, 45, 90? I mean, all your photographs are showing 90 degrees. How are you getting 45 degrees? All right. So you have to also question the stuff. Are you talking about the streets? Are you talking about some design of uh, those facades or something? But you kept saying streets. So I was a little confused about this. Is this actually livable right now, or is it just a sort of a paper example? So there's one van, but it looks like the entire city is a ghost city, right? So I was also not sure about that. The second, and I don't know what vernacular wisdom went into it. That's the other thing. How are you differentiating between this example and the next example, as one is an institute and the other is a space, individual space? They're both institutes, right? So in your final, go back to your thing, your last slide. You're saying that one is institutional scale, the other is a unit scale. Like I wouldn't. I'm not sure how you'd actually. If I were to look at it in square footage size, this would be much bigger than the example of the school that you've taken. So, and and you make some things like the Gurukul style. How is that space explaining people back to this that there is a Gurukul style of education here?
So we actually visit.
No, that's true, but there are plants growing in the courtyard. What are you going to have then? I mean, see that's the other thing, right? So look at that. That's your photograph. Okay, there's one stump in the middle, and there are so many plants around. What kind of congregation are you expecting happening there for it to have a Gurukul model? What do you think? I'm a little so for me the thing is that how like you're looking at things and you're saying very different things. So I'm I'm not sure what I mean I don't know how to sort of make sense of it. So I think that the engagement needs to be a lot deeper than this. Why did you choose this as a case study, if you don't mind me asking?
So we actually visited this case study and it actually inspired us to think about the forms.
No, but it's like that's a me search answer, right? I went here, therefore. But why would you choose this? Like of all of the places, why would you choose this? Is it because it's close to you? Is that what you're saying? Then I was also very curious about this example. No, and how is it vernacular? Because a lot of the materials don't necessarily. That looks like an RCC roof with tile cladding. The windows don't seem very traditional. So I'm. This stood out as an example. I was like, why are they explaining this? Because even that stump looks like it's an RCC column in the middle over there. The structure is a frame structure. So so I think a lot of care needs to be taken about what examples you're choosing. And literally as in terms of scale, I think the other building is more an institutional scale than this is. So that's the sort of
I'm only sort of pointing out about your case studies, which I think you really sort of need to think about when you're comparing them. And the last thing that is there in your abstract, but you've really not dealt with, is globalization and digital innovation. Even in your conclusions, it wasn't very clear. All right. Thank you. Can I make a comment as well? Sorry. Uh, yeah, just to extend what I think all three have said. So sometimes it's difficult to come up with a big, large hypothesis. So when I was studying, one of my professors said that, you know, I don't think you're capable of coming up with a big hypothesis. So why don't you bury yourself in some study? And maybe the hypothesis will emerge from that study. So that's also another way to get into research. And so, the comments that he's making about these buildings, Kiran made a, observation that in fact, for Mazdas, there are no plans, there are no sections. So sometimes those traditional ways of looking at a building may reveal to you why maybe it works or it doesn't work. I mean, like Nisarga is a very problematic project. What is, how is, Daniel designing it? What is his ambition? How is he detailing it? So without thinking of a large framework or hypothesis, sometimes when you bury yourself in the study of something will reveal. So you have this concern about vernacular, and I think this particular project that you've chosen, Rudovsky's, pithy sort of statement, it looks to me like you are thinking of vernacular as a style, that you're thinking of it as something that looks a certain way. It's got a sloping roof, it's got a courtyard, that these are the elements of a vernacular. Whereas Rudovsky's talking about the ways things are made, or the way things are, in culture, or how they are produced. And that is missed in these case studies. So maybe the one of the ways to do it to further your research is to just go deep into it. Just study the plan, study the sections, and then and relate it to some, like he was asking, how are things made? What is the structure of these vernacular buildings that you like? Are there any lessons from that the architect has taken to inform his work or her work? So those are all familiar things for you. So you can do that, and that will maybe propel your research in a certain way. So thank you.
Thank you, Ashvi and Kashish, for your presentation. Next up, we will have the presentation from Ria Agarwal on the topic Reclaiming Mud towards a material practice rooted in ethics and not aesthetics. I invite you on the stage, Ria. Meanwhile, Ria, would you like to tell us what inspired you to take this topic?
We stand here at the brink of change when architecture faces this slight yet profound crisis, not of form, not of technology, but of ethics. And I would like to give credit to this year's theme being so potent that it pushed the envelope for all of us to redirect our gaze and understand what the future of built environment would look like with a lens of more conscience, context, and care. So, my topic also has been a trigger from the conference's theme itself. And continuing from what I was saying, globalization has also replaced a sense of place with sameness. and the climate crisis has exposed the cost of building without belonging. Our cities expand, but they rarely endure. And our materials claim to sustain, yet they stand detached from the soils they exploit. This paper was born out of this very dissonance. Good afternoon, respected jurors of the NIRC, my fellow authors, and the NASA community. I'm Riya Agarwal from Z108, and it's my honor to present my paper titled Reclaiming Mud Towards a Material Practice Rooted in Ethics, Not Aesthetics. Across contemporary architecture, mud is resurfacing not as a necessity but as a statement. Does mud today retain its identity, or has it become yet another homogenized substitute, a mere aesthetic nod to sustainability rather than a fundamental shift in material ethics? What was once a material of community and craft is now rebranded in elite consumption, detached from the cultural, ecological, and labor systems that once gave its meaning. So its revival lies in the paradox itself that we are embracing this ancient material and at the same time we are erasing the very ethos that it started on and defined and was defined with. The aim of this paper is to reposition mud within an ethical and a contextual framework, one that restores its embedded knowledge, celebrates its labor systems, and resists commodification. To do this, the research broadly also interrogates what is preserved, what is erased, and what is fabricated in this process. Methodologically, the study analyzes a set of case studies, each positioned along a spectrum of ethical to performative use, and evaluates it across certain parameters. Then there is a diagnostic framework that this paper proposes, which is a tool not to romanticize vernacular but to test whether mud's revival today carries substance or just spectacle. Moving on to my literature review. Uh, while developing this paper, I turned to a repository of theorists and architects working at the intersection of material ethics, vernacular knowledge, and modern development. The early discourse in vernacular architecture, particularly Amos Rappaport, established that vernacular forms arise not from design intent, but from the logic of local life as we know it, that is, climate, craft, and culture. By the late 20th century, Paul Oliver established that how modernism is in fact what reframed vernacular knowledge as obsolete, almost privileging permanence and uniformity over adaptability and care. Arturo Escobar's The Making and Unmaking of the Third World deepened this critique, exposing how development in fact appropriates indigenous and traditional forms while erasing the knowledge systems that sustain them, a process that echoes in today's mud revival. More recently, uh, authors also describe this as aestheticized informality, where the language of the vernacular is retailed, but it's stripped of its social and political depth. The sustainability discourse that follows has become increasingly technocratic, all while neglecting land ethics, labor transparency, and justice. This was extended in the idea, arguing that no material can truly be sustainable if it excludes the users and the makers who were involved in giving it the meaning. These foundational ideas situate the building as an act of participation and not consumption. Together, these readings reveal a clear trajectory from vernacular as lived ethics to vernacular as image. And this is the shift from participation to performance that the paper also challenges. Moving on to my case studies, in translating these theoretical questions into practice, each of these case studies are positioned differently along the spectrum of material ethics and performativity. The intent was not to rank the cases, but to understand how mud operates across varying socio-economic contexts, from necessity to luxury and from community-driven resilience to market-driven imagery. The first case is Yasmin Larry's disaster relief shelters in Pakistan, and this sits at an ethical end of the spectrum. Moving on to the Lalit Mangal Hotel in Haryana, this occupies a middle ground, what I call a hybrid model. And finally, the Antana Spa and Resort in Rajasthan exemplifies the extreme other end of the spectrum. So I'll detail out these cases with the framework that I've formulated. I have basically married the case studies into the framework parameters and tried to figure out that and tried to dissect what's happening. Basically, through these cases, what emerges is a clear gradient that from mud as empowerment to mud is just an embellishment. The framework becomes a diagnostic tool in this case to measure where along this line the project stands ethically, rooted, or performatively green. So, starting off with the first parameter, it examines whether mud is used for the actual material logic, for example, thermal mass, rather than just a decoration. So, in case of Lalit Mangal Hotel, they've used rammed earth as the load bearing walls structurally and not superficially. So, that again is a good usage. And they've also used insulated cavity for thermal performance. In the case of Yasmin Lari's shelters, she's used rime-rendered mud walls that are not just surfaces but they act as functional structures responding to the climatic risks. Now, in contrast, we have the Antana earth villas, which evoke mud through facades and earthy finishes, but their wall systems often rely on stabilized or imported finishes, which dilutes the very material logic. Moving on to the second parameter, which is community labor and knowledge systems. In Yasmin Lari's project, there is a strong participation. Local and often unskilled workers also learn techniques. Women are trained. Shelters and eco infrastructure are often built by the communities themselves as well. Moving on to the Lalit Mangar in this case, it shows a partial success while the material sourcing and the structural innovations are good, but knowledge transfer and participation by local artisans are limited. Moving on to the extreme example of Fontana villas, they have minimal community engagement, and local artisans may be used for finishes or decorative motifs, but the core technique and the decision making is not in their hands, making it a rather superficial engagement with the material. Moving on to my third parameter, which is ecological and contextual fit. Now, this becomes extremely important. So, in the case of Lalit Mangal, 80% of the walls are built from the soil excavated on the site itself. Yet, certain hybrid interventions also dilute the pure biodegradability of it. And contextually speaking, they have a courtyard ideology in their design layout, which gives reference to a village. So I can show you actually the image here. So here, if you see that there's a sort of a courtyard typology that they've used. Uh, so in this one, they actually have like hollowed out courtyards. Moving on to my fourth parameter, which is socio-cultural and economic positioning. In Lari's work, architecture is an act of empowerment almost. Women trained as builders, communities authoring their own homes. Her model is bottom up, resisting any elite tropes. In the case of Lalit Mangar, despite adopting vernacular motifs and courtyards, it still remains an elite resort. It references culture more than it enables communities. And in the case of Antana Villas, it's clearly a part of a luxury ecotourism project wherein the vernacular forms operate primarily as branding and not as cultural agency. What emerges in this case is a layered gradient that Larry's work sits near the actual pole, whereas Lalit Mangal, while stronger in material roles, remains hybrid in social terms. And in the case of Ventana, it's closer to performative branding. These detailed comparisons also help us reveal exactly where projects succeed and where they betray the ethics they signed up to uphold. So, to conclude, this research set out to question the ethics of mud contemporary resurgence, to ask whether it signals, whether its return signals a genuine material reorientation or merely another performative rebranding within the aesthetics of sustainability. Through the framework's application, it's become evident that while several projects celebrate the poetics of mud, not a lot engage with the politics of it. And material intelligence alone does not equate to material ethics. It's only when ecological fit, labor equity, and community agency converge that mud architecture can reclaim its regional and ethical grounding. The framework offered here, spanning material logic, community systems, ecological fit, and socio-cultural positioning, functions not as a scoring matrix but as a diagnostic lens to expose where the integrity of mud as a living, situated material is upheld. Yet the framework also has its limitations. The assessment is inherently qualitative and interpretative at this point. Much of the evidence depends on secondary documentation as well. Future iterations could extend this work by integrating a quantitative phased framework and also on ground engagement with stakeholders. Um, Ultimately, the paper argues that the future of sustainable design cannot rest on nostalgic revivals or aestheticized authenticity. It demands an ethical recalibration, one that repositions materials not as commodities, but as agents of social and ecological repair. Mud, in this sense, is not a metaphor for past, but a mirror for our future, a measure of whether our architecture can once again belong to lands, climates, and communities they claim to serve. Thank you.
Opening the stage now for questions.
Hello. Thank you, Ria. How long did you take to complete this?
I started about 6 months ago, but the initial inquiry of mud as a material for the built future started in second year itself when I attended a conference. So, trying to understand whether mud is the answer, whether mud is like a concrete answer for the future, is was something that was always my interest. But the theme of the conference allowed me to kind of explore it in this direction.
And was this done for the thesis or something?
No.
Okay. Because I truly see a kind of a very deeper engagement with the questions that you're asking. Maybe the answers still needs refinement, but I see a very deeper understanding and engagement with what you're asking, and also the cases. I think probably we need to revisit. What is and something which was coming out very interestingly was whether mud is a regionalist material or is it like a capitalist appropriation. I think very well stated question, hypothesis which is being inquired within this. But what is really problematic is I think three sets of parameters you are using for evaluation of your cases. That is community, labor, knowledge. Uh, that second part, I think, because in the current times, contemporary times, engaging community for all the projects might be a big challenge. So, what do you mean by community engagement? Needs a deeper understanding, like it could be something else, so maybe it is a knowledge that's coming from the community, not really their hands are coming into the building part of it, because the scale of projects which we are engaging with is far, far higher than what it was earlier when mud is being used at a local community rather than the collective architecture. So I think community labor and knowledge systems need very different kind of questions uh, to kind of make this analysis across different cases. So I think that's about it, and I think it is quite uh, well crafted. So
Thank
at
you.
that I
In fact, to add to what you said, that was actually something that was one of the parameters I wasn't sure of, especially after the case study. Since the Lalit Mangar hotel was a commercial project, they couldn't accommodate community and this labor aspect itself, because of which they in the framework have scored moderate, which actually made me question whether this parameter should be a criteria.
No,
as
first of all, that even B2B questions, are they correct? No, maybe you need an inquiry. We can go with it. And also, it's the only one I didn't see a mentor.
Yeah.
Who is the mentor?
I was assigned architect Sandeep Prakash.
And also along the group, you might have come across different mentors, teachers, mentors.
Of course, the fact
Yeah.
in the architecture school, they are also a big part of the reason why these inquiries are triggered in the first place and these questions come.
So
So
I
of course,
think it would be nice to give citations or acknowledge their contributions, because it's the only one which I found that it's only the author is being credited. So nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ria. It was a very interesting presentation. I think you've definitely picked on some important analytical threads when looking at a material like labor. So there is, you're making some interesting correlations. So I was very intrigued by the relationship between ethics and aesthetics. Um, so I think what I have enjoyed listening to are some of the threads, the lines that you're pursuing. I have a couple of comments as we must and do. My first comment is about the sort of overall positioning of you've taken three case studies, two of which are of a kind, and the third project is of a very different kind, in the sense that the opportunities available to the community in a disaster relief housing, the sort of whether it's by way of money, whether it's by way of materials, is very different compared to what is available to a high-end hotel. Um, in the first instance, we are talking about a resource constrained situation, and presumably one where, because of resource constraint, you have to use local labor. So, my concern is when we add a moral value to a context of poverty or crisis, it can become slightly problematic, right? So I was wondering that if you had to, which is not to say that you cannot examine material usage, but I was wondering whether it would be more productive to compare that project with other kinds of post-disaster housing or the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, because then you're comparing apple to apple. And so your comparison is sort of in the right direction. The framing is in the right direction. I'm just not sure of the entities that you're comparing. Because if you change that, then the choice of using mud here becomes, so your conclusions will still be valid, except that the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is alienating because, you don't use local, but then it also brings into question why not? Because in most cases, in amongst very poor communities, they are daily wages. If they're going to spend 3 months building their own house, they are not going to earn wages. So then the economic logic of the relationship between wage, material, and aesthetic, it takes on a very different form. With the same logic, if I was to compare Lalit Mangar or Anant Villa with any other standard five-star hotel, these guys are actually going to look good in comparison. So I think it's because you compare it with the disaster project that suddenly the Anant Villas, they look like they're, just blustering. Well, they are choosing to build in mud, whether, and other five-star hotels don't. So I think what you compare it against ends up becoming the sort of ways in which you value your project. And and then just these, again, a bit of a larger point. The the sense that I get is you are talking of aesthetics as essentially performative, and you are ascribing an ethical construction to some kind of a natural, uncorrupted use of material. Whenever mud is used without any additives, it is dependent on women to plaster those surfaces again and again. So there is a definite correlation between gendered labor and pure material usage, which is true of most other aspects of women's lives. Women are the custodians of whatever. So I think it's important to just recognize what is this ethics that you are valuing. And there is, of course, there is a lot of writing on the relationship between ethics, aesthetics, and what is called epistemology, which is the nature of knowledge. So there is when things look a certain way, it is because they are framed within certain value systems. So ethics is the form of things, the appearance of things. It's not just devoid of any deeper meaning. So we are having this conversation because you raised these. So great job on raising a lot of these issues, and also recognizing that. So minor things. You said that modernism framed the vernacular as primitive. Yes, but until it was also in the context of high modernism that the primitive became a thing that architects became concerned with. So these are complicated relationships, and it's great that you're looking at them. It would, for yourself, it would be a great idea to just flip all your assumptions and see what happens of the opposite. If you were to assume that had Yasmin Lari's project been done in concrete or something, would the houses have lasted longer? That kind of stuff. So if you just flip all your assumptions and see, okay, what is the scenario that emerges? You can come up with another set of realities that are not necessarily wrong, but they derive from other logics. But great stuff. Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the good report.
So, I enjoyed the first framing of the paper, and it's, yeah, I think all three of us would agree that it's actually well written and it's engaging. But I think, and all three of us are going to sort of tell you that it's your case studies that are really sort of thing. It's like that, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? So with that, one was too hot, one was uh, too cold, one was in the middle, or something like that. But it's like the case studies at chess sort of are hugely problematic for another reason, at least for me, because you're talking about ethics and aesthetics. You end up talking about morals at the end because you start moralizing about it, which I think kind of is away from the potency of the paper. Do you know the difference between moralizing and ethics and morality?
Not as well articulated.
All right. So ethics are something that you practice. Morals are what others should practice. All right. That's sort of what ends up happening. So literally, the beginning was great. I was sort of looking to see where it was going, and then the choice of case studies. It's like Anand was sort of that. When you get married, you choose kind of ugly bridesmaids so that you look nice on your wedding day. It's like that. The Anand Thrillers project is there. This is like the crappy thing that's supposed to be. And I'm like wondering why. I mean, for someone who sort of the beginning came off as very, very erudite, I think you're completely let down by these case studies. And for different reasons. I mean, I didn't see the Yasmin Larry project in the same way that she does, and I think she absolutely makes sense. What are these people going to do? Are they going to look after a job? I mean, look for a job? Are they going to build their own houses? And so that is problematic. The other thing that I also, just as a side note, it's not really the main set of my arguments, is that you talked about material intelligence, but that material intelligence. So recently, I have a friend of mine in Goa who's building a raft earth project, and the amount of research he had to put in just to try and get the composition of the clay correct, because Goa's soil or mud is not amenable to some of these structures, right? So it's important for you to also sort of see the complexity within the mud. It's not just as simple as, it's there. You're using the right words like material intelligence. And I'm hoping to have seen that. Like, why is it that in Haryana you're not going to have too much of Ramdas projects? Maybe you have them in Himachal. There's those kinds of things also that one was hoping to see in that intelligence, and then how those communities can engage with it, etc. All right. But otherwise, I really wanted to sort of see how this could have been taken forward to the end. All right, thanks.
I'll definitely work on it. So thank you.
I have a quick thing to make. I think all of us enjoyed the research part because the the question was to provocatively ask, look at critically what I think it was very clear. I think the examples you also figured out, but I have another. If you had even chosen the right examples, like he asked like where are the courtyards, right? And I'm going to come to a very basic. This is an undergrad research paper, and we are taught how to draw. Your material logic question, it can't come as parameters. It should come as the wall sections. It would have clearly told what is cladding or what is composition, what is the foundation, uh, like that is fully structural in a circular way, or this is rammed up in a linear way. Like three wall sections and its compositional quality, all you could have built just through three wall sections. Because again, this is still an architect writing a research paper to explaining an idea, and you could have used. We just checked the plan of the Haryana project. It has a lot of courtyards, like courtyard rammed up to different typology. So I think you could still, even that just could have been one slide of three wall sections, and it could have explained more clearly what those things are. But again, great starting points. These are just additional because there's so much to say. We are adding.
Yeah, thank you, Ria. Really enjoyed reading your abstract and subsequently the paper as well. Um, I have a completely I have an aside rather than a comment on your paper, but we were recently at a conference and this Irish architect, he describes the opening of one of the chapels that he designed. And it was a February and it's late in the night, so it's pretty dark. They come into the chapel and it's candle mass service at the chapel. So the chaplain has got a candle and then all of them are happy, they have candles and they pass on the light. And he says, for a brief moment in the chapel, everybody who had a part in the making of the building were illuminated, that you were able to see everybody. And then they all went out, assembled under the beech tree, and disappeared into the night. I mean, one of the things that I'm really enjoying to address Anita's question really is as architects, I mean, we forget that the artifact that is produced is actually not the point in a way. Yes, you build and the building then has a life, but it is the community that comes together to make that. The people in the office, the contractors, and to listen and to hear and to engage in this as a communal effort, like that great mosque in Mali. Every few years the whole community comes up to make this building anew. And so I mean, aside from the mud and everything else, there is this humility that one has to bring to the process, that you're in it with others to make something of meaning. And so that's really wonderful that you trigger that question. Of course, with all of the other comments, I think you should take it forward. It's a wonderful paper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ria, for sharing your research with us. Um, so we have had 5 research paper presentations and we have concluded the morning session for now. We shall be breaking for lunch for around 50 minutes, 45 minutes for lunch, and we shall start again at 1:30 at a separate venue for the afternoon session. So we will be continuing at the auditorium that is just right here on the side. And we will have the remaining 6 presentations in the auditorium. I would request the students to please be patient and stay seated. Exit the room one by one slowly so that we do not have a big crowd assembling over here. And thank you all.